Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive that I think you're going to find super interesting.
Yeah.
So today's topic is a new model for microfinance in Africa. And what makes it so fascinating is that it's trying to combine like two very different things.
Yeah, exactly.
The ethical framework of Islamic finance with the whole cutting edge tech of DAOs.
Right. And it's really trying to tackle, those challenges we always hear about with like traditional microfinance.
Like those crazy high interest rates?
Yeah, exactly. Those interest rates that can be really predatory and kind of trap borrowers in this horrible cycle of debt.
Yeah, it's like you're trying to help, but you end up hurting sometime.
Exactly. So this new model is trying to address that by baking in ethical considerations right from the start.
I like that, baking in ethics.
Yeah, like it's part of the recipe.
So it's not just about giving out loans, it's about empowering communities.
Exactly. And that's where Islamic finance comes in.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a sec, because I know some people might not be super familiar with Islamic finance.
Sure. So at its core, Islamic finance is all about ethical and socially responsible investing and financing.
Right, so it's not just about making money, it's about making money the right way.
Exactly. It's got this whole set of principles and guidelines that govern how money can be made and used.
Okay, so what are some of those principles?
Well, one of the foundational principles is the prohibition of interest.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that, Recon, bro.
Yep, that's the one. So in Islamic finance, you can't just lend money and collect interest on top of it.
That makes sense. It kind of goes against the whole idea of shared risk and reward.
Exactly. So instead of interest, Islamic finance focuses on profit and risk sharing.
So it's more like a partnership.
Exactly. The investor and the entrepreneur, they're both in it together. They share the profits, but they also share any potential losses.
So it's about fostering mutual success, not just extracting profit.
Exactly. And that aligns beautifully with the principles of transparency and community benefit that are central to Islamic finance.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture here, but what are some of the other key principles?
Well, another really important one is the avoidance of excessive uncertainty, or gharar.
Gharar. So what does that mean exactly?
Basically, it means that all transactions have to be crystal clear. There can't be any hidden terms or potential for exploitation.
Like no fine print surprises.
Everyone knows exactly what they're getting into from the start.
That sounds like a breath of fresh air compared to some of the shady stuff you hear about in traditional finance.
Right, and it's especially important when you're talking about empowering communities that have historically been marginalized by traditional financial systems.
Makes sense. So we've got no interest and no uncertainty. What's the third principle?
The third key principle is the discouragement of speculation, or Macer.
Macer. Okay, so how does that play out in practice?
It means that investments should be tied to real economic activities that benefit society.
So no gambling on risky financial instruments.
Right. It's about investing in things that create jobs, provide essential goods and services, and contribute to the overall well-being of the community.
So tangible stuff, real-world impact. Okay, I'm really digging these principles. But how do DAOs fit into all of this?
So that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, lay it on me.
So you know how DAOs are all about decentralization and transparency?
Yeah, like a community of investors coming together without a traditional bank or institution calling the shots.
Exactly. And that aligns perfectly with the principles of Islamic finance we've been talking about.
So how so?
Well, think about it. All transactions on a blockchain are recorded publicly and immutably.
Right, so everyone can see what's going on. There's no hiding anything.
Exactly. And that directly addresses the principle of gharar, because there's no room for hidden fees or shady dealings.
I see what you're saying. It's like built-in accountability.
Exactly. And that builds trust, which is essential for any financial system, let alone one that's focused on empowering marginalized communities.
So it's not just about good intentions. It's about having the mechanisms in place to ensure that those intentions are actually carried out. Okay, I'm getting it now. So the transparency of DAOs aligns with the Islamic principle of avoiding uncertainty.
Right, but it goes beyond that. The whole idea of community-driven decision-making that's central to DAOs also aligns with the Islamic emphasis on social responsibility.
Okay, so it's like democratic microfinance, where the community decides which businesses deserve support.
Exactly. It's about collective benefit, not just individual profit.
I love that it's like taking the power back from the big institutions and putting it in the hands of the people.
Exactly. It's about empowering communities to take control of their own financial destinies.
Okay, I'm sold on the concept, but I got to ask, how would this actually work in practice? Like, how would a DAO handle microfinance in Africa, specifically using these Islamic finance principles?
All right, so let's dive into that.
I'm ready.
There are a couple of specific models within Islamic finance that could be implemented through a DAO structure, and they're really cool.
Okay, hit me with them.
So one is called Mudaraba, and it's basically a profit-sharing partnership.
Okay, how does that work?
So the DAO would invest in a business, right? And then they'd split the profits based on a pre-agreed ratio.
Okay, sounds straightforward enough.
But here's the interesting part. If the business incurs losses, the DAO absorbs them unless there was like negligence on the part of the entrepreneur.
Oh, wow. So it's like the DAO is taking on more of the risk.
Exactly. It's about sharing the burden as well as the reward.
It's like a venture capitalist, but with a conscience.
Exactly. And that changes the whole dynamic between the investor and the entrepreneur. It's not just about extracting maximum profit. It's about fostering mutual success.
That's a really powerful concept.
Right. And then there's another model called Musharaka, which is more like a joint venture.
Okay, how's that different?
So in Musharaka, a group of people would pool their money together through the DAO to invest in a specific project.
Okay, I can see how that would work for like a community development project or something.
Exactly. Everyone shares both the profits and the risks proportionally.
So it's spreading the risk and the potential reward.
Precisely. And here's where the beauty of blockchain technology comes in. All of this is managed through smart contracts.
Ah, yeah, those self-executing agreements that live on the blockchain.
Yep, they automate the entire process from profit sharing to decision making, ensuring fairness, and eliminating the need for traditional intermediaries.
So it's not just about good intentions. There's actual code in place to enforce the rules.
Exactly, and that transparency extends to every aspect of the DAO.
Like how?
Well, let's say you want to know where your money is going, you can just check the blockchain.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or if you're curious about how decisions are being made, the voting record is public and immutable.
So it's like radical transparency.
Exactly. And that's crucial for building trust, especially in a sector like microfinance, which has often been criticized for lack of accountability.
Right. It's about empowering people with information so they can make informed decisions. This is all super fascinating, but before we get too carried away, I want to dive a little deeper into how this DAO would actually function. We've talked about profit sharing and joint ventures, but how would a DAO decide which businesses get funding or what projects to invest in?
That's a great question because it gets to the heart of what makes DAOs so unique.
Okay, so spill the beans.
The decision-making power lies with the community itself, not with some centralized authority.
So it's like democratic microfinance, where the people decide which businesses deserve support.
Exactly. And there are different models for how that decision-making process can work.
Like what?
Well, one way to do it is through quadratic voting.
Quadratic voting?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of that.
It's pretty cool. Basically, it gives more weight to votes from individuals who are deeply invested in the community's well-being.
So it's not just about who has most money.
Exactly. It prevents wealthy individuals from swaying decisions in their favor and ensures that the outcomes truly reflect the needs and priorities of the community as a whole.
That's a really interesting concept. I like that.
Yeah, it's a way to make sure that the power stays distributed.
Okay, so we got this DAO that's all about transparency and community decision-making.
Yeah.
But how do we guarantee that it stays aligned with Islamic finance principles? Like, with all this decentralization, it seems like there's a lot of room for things to go astray.
That's a really important question, and that's actually where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Ooh, a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that. So for now, we'll leave it there, and we'll see you in part 2.
Sounds good. All right, so we're back and, where we left off.
Right, with that big question.
Yeah, how do we make sure this whole microfinance DAO actually stays true to those Islamic finance principles?
It's a big deal, right? We can't just assume it'll all work out on its own.
Definitely not. We need safeguards in place.
Exactly. So what are we talking about here? Like, what are some of those safeguards?
Well, one key element is having an ethics committee.
What, like a board of ethics superheroes?
Haha, not quite. But yeah, it's kind of like that they're like the guardians of the DAO's ethical compass.
Okay, I like it. So who would be on this ethics committee?
Well, you'd want people who really understand both Islamic finance and how the DAO works.
So like a mix of experts.
Yeah, you'd need experts in Islamic law and finance, maybe even some community leaders who can provide like local context.
Okay, so they'd be making sure everything the DAO does is halal.
Exactly. And that's not just like a rubber stamp approval. They'd actually be scrutinizing every proposal that comes through.
Wow, so they'd be pretty busy.
Yeah, for sure. But it's super important because they're the ones making sure that the DAO isn't funding anything that goes against Islamic principles.
So they'd be checking to see if the business is involved in anything haram.
Right, like gambling or alcohol production or anything like that.
Yeah, okay, I got it.
But it goes beyond just avoiding the bad stuff. They'd also be looking at the business's overall impact on the community.
So, like, is it actually contributing to the well-being of the people?
Exactly. They'd be making sure it's promoting social good and economic development.
So it's like a holistic assessment.
Yeah, for sure. And beyond that, they'd also be responsible for ensuring transparency and accountability.
Like how?
Well, for example, any project funded by the DAO would have to provide regular financial reports.
So the community can see where the money's going.
Exactly, and how it's being used and what kind of impact it's having.
Makes sense. So it's like checks and balances, but on the blockchain.
Precisely. And if a business is found to be violating the ethical guidelines, the ethics committee has the power to take action.
Ooh, so there are consequences.
Yep, they could reduce funding or even kick the business out of the DAO altogether.
Wow, so they're not messing around.
Nope, and remember, everything's happening on the blockchain, so every decision, every transaction is permanently recorded and publicly auditable.
So there's no hiding from the truth.
Exactly, and that transparency itself acts as a deterrent against unethical behavior.
Right, because everyone can see what's going on.
Yeah, and the community can hold the ethics committee accountable too if they're not doing their job properly.
So it's like a self-regulating system.
Exactly. Everyone has a vested interest in making sure the DAO stays true to its ethical principles.
I really like that idea of collective responsibility.
It's powerful, right?
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the borrowers themselves. Like, how would this model actually impact their lives?
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about. At the end of the day, it's about helping people, right?
Absolutely. And I think the potential benefits for borrowers are huge.
Like how?
Well, remember the whole no interest thing we talked about with Islamic finance?
Yeah, that was a big one.
So that means borrowers wouldn't be crushed by those crazy high interest rates that make traditional microloans so hard to pay back.
It's like interest-free microfinance.
Exactly. And because the DAO is built on a profit-sharing model, the borrower's success becomes the DAO's success.
And vice versa, right?
Exactly. It's a win-win situation.
I love that it creates this sense of partnership and shared purpose.
And it aligns incentives in a much more positive way.
Right. It's not about exploitation. It's about mutual benefit.
And beyond the financial benefits, there's also this emphasis on social responsibility within Islamic finance.
Oh, yeah, like zakat.
Exactly. So a microfinance DAO could incorporate something similar where a portion of the profits generated are automatically allocated to community development projects or charities.
So it's like giving back to the community.
Exactly. It's about uplifting the whole ecosystem.
This all sounds fantastic, but I got to ask, are there any potential downsides? Are there any challenges we need to be aware of?
Oh, for sure. There are always challenges when you're trying to do something new and innovative.
Like what?
Well, one of the big ones is scalability.
Right. Like how do we take this from a small pilot project to something that can actually reach millions of people?
Exactly. It's going to require significant investment, not just in the technology, but also in building capacity within those communities.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about the people.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of education.
Like making sure people understand how DAOs and Islamic finance work.
Right. We need to demystify these concepts and make them accessible to everyone.
It's about empowering people with knowledge.
Exactly. And then there's the whole security aspect.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one with all this money flowing around on the blockchain.
Yeah, we need to make sure these platforms are secure and that people understand how to protect themselves from scams and hacks.
Right, it's a shared responsibility.
Exactly. And then there's the whole question of how this model will fit into the existing financial landscape.
Like, will traditional banks embrace this, or will they try to shut it down?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it'll probably be a mix of both.
So some will see it as a threat, and others will see it as an opportunity.
Exactly. And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, for sure. It's a brave new world out there.
It is. But I think this model has the potential to really shake things up in a positive way.
I agree. It's all about creating a more just and equitable financial system.
And that's a goal worth fighting for.
All right, well, this has been a super insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned a ton.
Me too. It's been great.
But before we wrap up, I want to ask you one more question. What do you think the future holds for this model? Like, where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a tough one, but I think I think we're going to see a lot more experimentation and innovation in this space over the next few years.
Like what kind of experimentation?
Well, I think we'll see different models for DAO governance emerge.
So like different ways of making decisions within the DAO.
Exactly. And we'll probably see a lot of experimentation with different types of Islamic finance contracts.
So finding the best ways to apply those principles in a DAO context.
Right. And I also think we'll see a lot more collaboration between traditional financial institutions and these new decentralized platforms.
So maybe banks will start incorporating some of these ideas into their own operations.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think the lines between traditional finance and DeFi are going to become increasingly blurred.
That's an interesting thought. So it's not necessarily about one replacing the other. It's about finding ways to work together.
Exactly. It's about creating a more diverse and dynamic financial ecosystem that can meet the needs of a wider range of people.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's all about expanding access to financial services and making sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate.
Precisely. And I think this model has the potential to play a really important role in that process.
I agree. It's all about empowering people and giving them more control over their own financial lives.
And that's a really exciting prospect.
It is. So to our listener out there, if you're interested in learning more about this, we encourage you to do your own research. There are a lot of resources available online, and it's a topic that's constantly evolving.
Yeah, there's always something new to discover.
And don't be afraid to ask questions and challenge assumptions. The more we talk about these ideas, the more likely they are to become a reality.
Exactly. It's all about creating a dialogue and working together to build a better future.
Well said. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap for today's deep dive. This has been a truly fascinating conversation, and I feel like I've learned a lot.
Me too. It's been a pleasure.
So to our listener out there, thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of finance and technology.
See ya.